Hi, Toby. Thank you so much for coming to BizTalk. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for your time and thanks for coming. So let's start talking a bit about yourself before talking about your startup.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I I originally sort of started a career in management. I was working for a large corporate, and I sort of got a little bit just, I suppose, disenfranchised um with that role, not really feeling like I had a huge influence on the operations and things. And so I was looking around, sort of looking externally and saying, like, what can I do? What am I going to find that's more fulfilling? And I was entertaining the idea of going into business on my own as an entrepreneur. But I didn't really know what to do. And then I read an article on the Internet of Things, and this article was articulating how the IoT is going to be, the fourth industrial revolution. It's going to change the way we do things. And I thought, you know what, that's what I'm going to start a business. That's the area I'm going to start a business in. So I pulled together some capital from sort of friends and family. And I actually started a business in sort of 2015. And that was an IoT business. We'd got a innovative sort of mobile remote wide area communicating GPS device that we could attach to pet collars, believe it or not. So we went to market in 2015 with that. And that's really where I sort of started to cut my teeth as an entrepreneur. And I learned a lot of hard lessons back then. The biggest being that the market, although looked on the face of it huge, it was the sort of demand for that kind of thing, and that sort of IoT, if you like, wasn't what it had sort of first been projected, and the market actually became quite saturated quite quickly. So we found ourselves in this sort of, no man's land of, limited demand, huge amount of competition. So we were looking around for a pivot. We were looking to move the business into other areas. And then, through my network, I learned about this need to track and monitor goods in the supply chain. And so in 2017, the business became Entopy. We took our first tranches of capital from external investors, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So let's talk about this history.
Yeah, let's talk about. Okay, so Entopy is a data orchestration platform. It specifically focuses on orchestrating data across the many stakeholders that comprise a supply chain. So that's really our use case. That's what we're focusing on, and this notion of supply chain visibility. And supply chain visibility is a really, really hot topic at the moment because modern supply chains are becoming more complex. They're becoming more fragmented. Consumer demands are increasing, so the expectation for product to be delivered, in a very, very timely way with complete visibility and transparency as to what's happening, that's just become the norm. But that's happening right across the supply chain. And then when you start to look at the large and very significant costs of operating a supply chain, and if you really interrogate those, the consequence of poor communication, the consequence of lack of data, the consequence of lack of visibility is a big driver on those costs of operation. So it's a real opportunity if businesses can gain greater visibility across their supply chain networks. Actually, there's a huge opportunity to improve customer experience. There's a huge opportunity to improve operational efficiencies. There's a huge opportunity to reduce costs, to improve relationships with other stakeholders with whom they're working. So that's been the goal. That's the goal of Entopy. The sort of mission statement, if you like, is to enable stakeholders across those supply chain networks to gain real-time, granular visibility, cost effectively, and in a way that's operationally viable. And like I said, the platform that we've built, it's an orchestration engine. So it works on the pretense that the data to achieve this visibility exists in the supply chain today. The overarching challenge then becomes, how do you capture data when it's siloed across many stakeholders, each operating their own systems to fulfill their respective roles? How do you capture and coordinate the data across many disparate systems in a way that delivers coherent visibility to the stakeholders that need it? And that's exactly what the Entopy platform does. So it's built on, I suppose, a number of principles. The first being the data's there. The second being it makes sense to access data in a way that, where it lives. So it makes very little sense to hoover up all of the data into a huge data lake from which users can interact with. It makes much more sense to actually access the data where it lives, because ultimately those systems that hold the data are maintained, they're owned, operated and maintained by the respective stakeholders that use them. The third is all around privacy, and this is where Entopy secret source comes in. So it's our ability to intelligently orchestrate data. So we dip in and out of systems, pulling out only relevant data for particular stakeholders. And fourth is delivering coherent visibility. It's delivering objects, data products that human beings can interact with, that other systems can interact with. And we call those digital twins. And the focus of us is to create digital twins at consignment level within the supply chain. So the platform's a really powerful tool. It essentially enables multiple stakeholders across the supply chain network to interact with all of the data regarding individual consignments in a single place. The same goes for the systems that they use. So, harnessing and leveraging data in the way that we do paves the way to things like automation, radical improvements to communication between the stakeholders, and ultimately helps businesses to achieve visibility across their supply chain networks in a cost-effective and operationally viable way.
Thank you, Toby. Well, that's very exciting. Supply chain is such a huge problem today, more than ever. When it comes to, because you manage so much data, how do you make sure the data you are collecting are the good one in between so many stakeholders? Okay,
so the platform centers itself around this concept of a digital twin. So what that provides us, if you like, is a fixed schematic that essentially our platform needs to populate. So we're starting with a predefined framework. Obviously, we connect to the systems in secure ways using application program interfaces, which many of these supply chain systems facilitate and enable. But sometimes we have to be a bit creative around how we mine that data. But the key thing is, as the schematic, as the digital twin is created, throughout that process, our software is essentially autonomously defining parameters and assigning policies that aid the next piece of data capture. So if I give you an example, let's say, for example, we're connected to, we're providing visibility of a consignment moving from from stakeholder A, that might be a supplier of goods, and that consignment is going to a retailer, and it's being moved by a logistics company. So you've got three stakeholders involved in that very, very basic, simplistic model. Well, Entopy would connect directly to the various systems across all stakeholders. So the systems themselves don't integrate, they connect only to the Entopy platform. And then we start to populate the digital twin that represents the consignment of interest. Now, as we go through the population of that schematic, we learn that actually it's this vehicle that is going to be moving the consignment, and it needs to arrive at its particular destination on a particular date, maybe with a time window. So we now have parameters from which we can go and select only relevant data from the logistics company's telematics system. Okay, so rather than going in and pulling data from 1,000 vehicles, perhaps the logistics company's got 1,000 vehicles, that have, this tracking capability enabled. Rather than pulling data from all 1,000 vehicles, we're actually only pulling data from a vehicle that we've essentially been given permission to monitor. So that gives you a very, very basic example of how we define policies in real time to ensure that we're only pulling data that's relevant to the particular stakeholders. And of course, the consignment that we've created becomes its own sort of digital object, right? It's a twin, and that has the data that comprises that consignment. And so the two stakeholders that have an interest in that particular consignment can interact with it. But then maybe another stakeholder that's completely external to that chain also wants visibility of a consignment going through the same logistics network. Well, we follow the same process, but because it's an individual and separate twin in that particular instance, we can control access at the digital twin level, meaning only relevant stakeholders interact with the data that they want to see and they are permitted to see, if that makes any kind of sense to you.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, there are so many different supply chain. How complex you can go? There are some of them very complex.
Oh, supply chains are incredibly complicated, which is why our initial focus is on the in-transit part of the supply chain. So this is an area where businesses have probably the least visibility. And by in-transit, we're talking about product when it moves between stakeholders. So in that example of going from a supplier to a retailer, or between physical locations, any kind of in-transit movement, but that is our core focus. And the reason we focus there is because of the complexity of supply chains. Now, of course, as the business evolves, as we mature, we might start to look beyond that. But the principle, the technological proof of what we're doing can be demonstrated in the in-transit part of the supply chain. And it's our belief that that particular part of the supply chain is an area that the visibility is lacking, and therefore our technology can provide, the most value.
When you talk about in transit, any kind of, for example, shipping.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we are agnostic with mode of transport. We're involved in projects that comprise road freight and sea freight, and it's a case of actually coordinating data from the various logistics legs to fulfill the sort of end-to-end transit, if you like, of those goods. So we're agnostic with regards to transport mode. As I said right at the start of all of this, it is our belief and an underlying principle of Entopy that, if not all, the majority of data to achieve supply chain visibility exists today. We've had this huge influx of IoT after the last decade, over the last decade, something north of 10 billion devices deployed globally, obviously not all in supply chain, but it gives you a sense of actually, these kind of things are becoming connected now. So tracking data of ships, very, very, very much available. Scheduling data of ships, scheduling and tracking data of aircraft. Same with road freight. I think in the UK, something close to 90% of commercial HGVs have a tracking capability. So the data's there. Providing the data's there, that's really our limitation.
I mean, who buys your product?
So we've seen a large amount of adoption in the sort of marketplace area. So, our primary sort of footprint is UK at the moment, right? We do have links through partnerships into other territories, but our primary market is the UK. And we're working with some really innovative businesses in the UK that utilize this kind of marketplace model. Those that have particularly poor visibility are companies that are moving large, clunky stuff, because what you've got is the phrase ugly freight is used quite regularly with some of the customers that we're working with. And what you've got there is, because there is a shortage of hauliers that want to move that ugly freight, the visibility that they therefore have to provide because of the lack of competition is minimal. So it's a particularly difficult area to get any visibility, yet alone coherent. But of course, we do work in areas where the freight is, I suppose, more common and is used by your traditional couriers. It's just in that case less about mining data, more about coordinating and orchestrating the data amongst them. We're also involved in some really exciting national infrastructure projects. One is one I think we've just announced a major partnership with a world-class IT services business, where we're working sort of hand in hand with their technology teams to deliver, a really revolutionary solution and service. And there's another exciting national infrastructure project in our pipeline. So it's a really kind of mixed bag of customers at the moment. But what I would say is the businesses that are most concerned about getting this kind of visibility are businesses that have very fragmented, very complex supply chains, where there is a particular where it's very easy to articulate the cost of the lack of visibility, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, if I am a business, I want to somehow manage my data. I'm coming to you because the data you're providing to me maybe can reflect a better management on my side, what I'm doing.
That's correct.
I need to understand why I should pay your service.
So let me just play an example out to you without naming names. Mm-hmm. So there's a group that we're working with that have a very successful marketplace, and that comprises 300-400 suppliers, right? So their marketplace comprises 300-400 suppliers. They, as a brand, invest heavily in marketing and brand awareness and customer acquisition. So customers come to them to buy stuff, but they don't warehouse anything. They don't hold any stock. They leverage their 300-500 strong supplier network to fulfill orders that are made through their website. Okay, so it's a really fantastic business model because it means their overheads are relatively low, and what they're really focusing on is the customer acquisition side and growth. And they work with the suppliers who are incentivized by their customer acquisition, but ultimately do the more costly fulfillment and warehousing of orders. Brilliant business model from a commercial point of view. Where it starts to fall down is the operational visibility that our client has. That impacts their ability to service customers. It means that when customers call up and query their order, they have very limited visibility as to what's actually happened with it. What ends up happening, they end up having to get on the phone to the supplier and ask them what's happening with their customer's shipment, if that makes sense. And the second side is sort of brand presence and customer service. So they want to own the customer journey, but they're outsourcing a very important part of that customer journey. And that part that they're outsourcing is the fulfillment and communication with the customer in that particular leg of the supply chain. So that is a really good example of needing to overlay this orchestration network to centralize the data and provide them the visibility that they require to improve operations, to improve service levels, to improve customer experience, and to improve brand presence.
What's the traction today?
So we have, since 2020, which is when this particular product went live with its first customer, we have grown at about 300% year on year since then. So we're really excited by the rate of growth. We're on track to sustain that growth this year. We are acquiring more customers. So we've had a 100% growth in customer accounts this year. So you can see that we're not only growing through customer growth, account revenue, but we're also growing in the acquisition side as well. Our brand is becoming more known, and what we do is becoming more known, and people are becoming more aware of the challenge and the potential solutions to it. So we're very excited about the traction that we've had to date. We're very excited about the growth that we're recording. We're incredibly excited about the next couple of years, because I think that's when we're going to start to really make a mark.
In terms of business model, how does it work?
So it's sort of two parts. So what we're talking about here is mission critical customizable software. Okay, so there is no kind of commodity SaaS product that can do what I've just described. Ultimately, you have to integrate with target systems, and there is always going to be a level of configuration required to make our product as operationally powerful as our clients want it to be. And we're very prepared to invest time in doing both of those things, because ultimately that leads to account stickiness and customer loyalty, right? And what this is all about is maximizing the value that we're delivering. So we invest heavily at the start of any kind of acquisition, any kind of customer acquisition, where we deploy our own developer resource. And we act like a consultancy in that particular instance. We act like a consultancy services type business, right? But then sitting alongside that, we have a licensed model where we're essentially licensing our software. We're licensing the intelligent orchestration and digital twin technology, and we do that in a very granular way. So again, what we're trying to do here is align the value that we're delivering with the cost to the customer. So we charge on a by transaction basis. It's an API credits model. It takes about half an hour to explain, so I'm not going to go through it right now. But yeah, it's really quite straightforward. I mean, you have the initial onboarding, if you like, and we work very closely with the customer, at least for the first year of their adoption of our service, because what we want to do is grow the software across their business, grow the capability that we're delivering for them in an area of the business to other areas of the business. And we want to maximize the value that our software is ultimately delivering. So we will work very closely with customers in that initial stage. But then the accounts sort of enter a sort of maturity stage where actually the license revenue that's being generated through our software increases, and that yields obviously much more SaaS-like margins.
I mean, you are UK based, your market today is UK. What's going to be tomorrow? Are you going to move, for example, to Europe?
So we're like I said, we're already starting to explore that. So we've got some really exciting partnerships, that are taking us into markets outside of the UK. I think that there are our pipeline is incredibly attractive, predominantly UK. So I would say probably for the next 18 months, I wouldn't expect any huge splashes outside of the UK market. But you never know. I mean, the partnership network that we have is broad, and the use cases for the platform are pretty far-reaching. So I suppose the cool thing is, because this is a software business, other than cultural and language barriers, there are very little other barriers to entry into other markets. We use scalable cloud infrastructure. The platform's been built at enterprise grade. So there's nothing stopping us from going into those markets other than focus, size, and the usual sort of cultural and language barriers. So markets like Australia and the US probably make a lot of sense for us.
Where do you see the most of the scale on the SaaS model?
Yes, 100%. So the work, the investment that we make early on in the customer acquisition cycle pays dividends in years 2 and 3, right? Because what you're doing is you're maximizing the footprint, you're maximizing the amount of systems that our software is interacting with, you're maximizing the value that we're delivering for the customers, you're cementing the sort of software as an operational cornerstone of those businesses, so you can be sure of account retention. And by the time you get into years 2 and 3, when it becomes, you know, predominantly license revenue, we've really kind of maximized the transaction throughput, and actually the maintenance of the accounts on a by account basis falls away. It becomes much more sort of infrastructure and overall management is the challenge. So it becomes much more effective. So the scalability for us absolutely is in after that initial phase. I mean, the obvious other point is, for us to make that investment, for us to do a good job in the early phases of customer acquisition, we have to deploy high class, high quality people. And that's what we do, and that creates limitations on capacity and things like that. So there's a lot for us to think about as we go through the next stages of growth. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Of course. What's your vision for where do you see your company in 3-5 years? Where do you want to go?
So I have seen what this software can do. I have watched our customers do things with it that I didn't expect. I have seen results that we didn't expect. We're involved in projects that potentially will shape very, very significant national policy and challenges, right? So my vision is to continue improving and doing what we do and building on the foundations that we've done. I mean, I think the really exciting thing is what we're doing. Although we have a supply chain focus, although we have a very narrow supply chain focus in the Intransit part of intelligent data orchestration, leveraging digital twins in the way that we do, has a very, very broad application across many, many other sectors, many, many other use cases. So the vision is to continue to build the product, but I suppose start to shape it in a way that we can enter and access other markets and other use cases more easily.
Are you fundraising now?
We're not at the moment, no. We have quite a bit of interest in what we're doing. We have a small network of angels and VCs that we know quite well. We have our existing shareholder base as well. And I suppose the external relationships that we have are particularly interested in us right now. We've just announced a major deal. We're proving the technology, and we're seeing really, really good results from existing customers. But what we're saying is we're looking towards the end of this year, possibly early 23. We want to see what the market does. We feel that we're in a position where we can grow a little bit more, hit some more milestones, and we'll be in the market probably early next year. But what I will say is we're very open to talking to people now. So one of my mentors once said to me, the best time to engage and have conversations with capital is when you don't need it. Yeah. So we're super happy to have those conversations and tell people about what we're doing.
Absolutely, that's completely right. You have much more leverage when you do not need the money than when you desperately need.
Good advice. Yeah.
Toby, thank you so much for coming to BizTalk. It's been a very good pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.